So, you have this strange thing. I even tried it as an experiment, which is try going on Twitter and expressing a middle-of-the-road opinion. In other words, a qualified opinion with which most people could sensibly agree. And I tried sentences like, I'm really fond of Piers Morgan in small doses. You can try the same of, say, Jordan Peterson, who I quite like in reasonable doses, but I wouldn't want to become that invested in a point of view. Okay? And the strange thing is, nobody responds to that opinion on Twitter, middle-of-the-road opinion. It doesn't garner any response. It doesn't get retweeted. It doesn't get replied to. But also, stranger still, you feel really weird writing it. As you type and press send, you feel slightly ridiculous. That Twitter opinions are supposed to be kind of the equivalent of a kind of bitch slap or a highly contrarian position. And when you write something seemingly banal, not only does it get no attention and no traction, and so you do have a very strange media world in which opinions which are to some extent ridiculous effectively outcompete, in an evolutionary sense, opinions which are moderate and perfectly sensible.
Yeah.
I mean, our opinion, we mentioned this, I think, on the last podcast, which is a perfectly sane opinion on Starbucks is, I don't think it's the last word on coffee, but equally, I'm quite glad there's a lot of them around because I can always get a pretty good coffee anywhere I want to go.
Yeah.
But that opinion doesn't gain traction in a social media environment where people just go, I hate it, or I love it. And so we live in this sort of slightly weird Marmite world.
Yeah, you can't, nothing, even as brands now, in terms of putting this like food brand, you've got to stand for something. Like it's kind of almost like it spawns out of that social media. It's just like, who can be the most, there was a piece about this. I don't know if you saw, if you heard of the brands Surreal and Days. One's alcohol-free beer and one's like protein cereal.
That's right.
And they've done this. I think their marketing is absolutely genius. I think they've done a great job, and it's all very tongue-in-cheek. So I think the guy came from Innocent as in their marketing director, but it's all like they'll do like kind of what I'm wearing now. They'll be like, does every entrepreneur in London have to wear this? And I'll do a photo shoot dressed like this. It's a piss take. I think it's hilarious. But then, and it's divisive, but I think the best marketing and the best anything is divisive. I think otherwise you become like a vapid, vanilla, just meh. And anyway, so some reporter got hold of it for the grocer and wrote this piece, and he'd done some like research. I just thought it was a fucking stupid article, but he's basically saying, that one of their things was, they'd done this billboard saying, look, Dad, I'd asked for a tenner, look at me now. They just got into Sainsbury's. Something like that. Very like...
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. Lovely. Anyway, some guy's gone into it and looked up and he's just like, yeah, your dad's a gazillion now, something like that. But and straight away, everyone's piled in.
Yes.
Piled in with... And as you say, it's either so... It's extremes. It's Marmite. It's either... Challenger Brands and FMCG is built for it's built for like rich kids who can actually afford to take these risks and set up these businesses. This side, the other side is it's not built for working class people. And I agree. It's kind of in the middle. It's like, yeah, these kids, their dad may be super rich, but they've still worked their bollocks off.
They've still created something.
Yeah, they've still created something, and they're still trying to do something. So, but as you say,
please God, we might have more people.
Yeah, but everything, everyone wants everything in every kind of and this is just talking about this specific niche. But it's like everything has to be binary these days. Nothing can be, as you say, if you take a walk down the middle and say Piers Morgan in small doses, you feel like a weirdo.
I think what comes out of that is that a fundamental, I mean, you will have seen him on the podcast circuit, Rob Henderson.
Yes,
K. Henderson.
I was listening to him last night on Chris Williams.
A brilliant guy, the coiner of the phrase luxury beliefs. And there's an additional take I'll have on that, which is that people increasingly...
Could you define...
Yes, I want to explain this. So Rob's thesis, he grew up in foster homes in Los Angeles. He's just published a book, which I really recommend. It's actually a bestseller in the US already, called Troubled, about his childhood. And he effectively had he I think has only a couple of memories of his mother, don't think he ever knew his biological father, ended up being fostered and fostered in turn in a slightly dysfunctional home. And I think, he would probably agree when I said that he got his shit together by joining the USAF to some extent, and then ended up going to Yale and then on
USAF
to
is
Cambridge.
Air Force.
US Air Force.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting points of the book is that the stability of your home background has a bigger determinant on your future success. This is not, by the way, I want to be absolutely clear about this. This isn't destiny, okay? It's simply statistics. But if you look at statistics, then generally people's life outcomes are more predicated on the kind of stability of their family background than on family wealth or on education. And yet, what Rob noticed is that when he got to Yale, it was fashionable to say, I think marriage is just a social construct, and, I think people should be free to, live in, open partnerships with, polyamory and so on, That now, those people themselves didn't actually adopt those behaviors, but it was fashionable to advocate for them.
Yeah.
And he argued that this was, and he coined the phrase effectively, fashionable beliefs, in that there were beliefs that people held not because they really believed in them or that there was empirical evidence that these beliefs were indeed true or useful, but simply because it raised your status holding that belief.
Wow.
Yeah. There are certain beliefs. It's very interesting. If you talk, for example, on the question of cannabis legalization, okay? Yeah. Now, by definition, if you've got into Yale, okay, you're probably not a stoner and you don't have a major problem with drugs. Because if you did have a major problem with drugs, you probably wouldn't have got there. But it's very fashionable for people who've got there who don't have a problem to go, it should all be decriminalized and blah, blah, blah. Simply because that's a belief which has become almost arbitrarily fashionable. And so you cleave to the beliefs that high status people tend to have, regardless of anything else, simply because they make you look good and feel good.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting to me is that to some extent the political left might have taken a wrong turn here, because if your principal motivation is the redistribution of wealth and resources, okay, there are ways psychologically where you can get rich people to give their money to poorer people and still feel good about it, okay? There are all sorts of psychological tricks. I mean, that's philanthropy, after all. That's the Gates Foundation at an extreme level, but it's also paying tax, paying duties. Airlines have worked out ways in which rich people pay considerably more to fly to the same destination than poor people. There are lots of ways in which you can separate the wealthy from their money without making them feel bad. But there's no way you can remove someone's or reduce someone's status and still leave them feeling better. That mechanism just doesn't exist, in my opinion. So by turning politics into a status war between tribes, where each group seeks in many ways to essentially promote policies and beliefs which make their own group look and feel good, and which perhaps demonstrate their commitment to a group that holds those beliefs, and thereby diminishing the status of people who disagree with you, you'll never change anybody's mind. Now, if you look at advertising, you can look at all the world's advertising. You will not see a single, for example, advertisement from Ford going, if you drive a GM car, you're a moron. Okay. Now, I'm sure it's been tried. In fact, I know it was tried, but I think it never ran. It was in the very late days of Bill Bernbach, I think, where they kind of showed monkeys drinking other brands of beer. And that was an ad which Bernbach himself killed, because he said, what we're trying to do is to win over our competitors' drinkers, and you're portraying them as apes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can't change people's minds by diminishing their status. Okay. I mean, the least persuasive message you can possibly construct is effectively, I am right and you're wrong, you dumb piece of shit. Okay. It's not persuasive. In many ways, if you want to persuade people, you do the opposite. You practice flattery, or you do things that elevate their status or make them feel good about doing something. And as I said, you can make people feel good about surrendering money and resources and time, Okay, and all sorts of voluntary activity goes on in life. We've got evolutionary mechanisms for that. What we haven't got, as far as I can see, is any evolutionary mechanism by which I can actually reduce my status and feel good about it.
Have you heard of Will Storr's status game?
Yeah, I've read it. It's fantastic.
I've the science of storytelling. The status game has
Yes,
has,
and his point is
arrived.
absolutely fair, which is that I mean, this is where, of course, great restaurants aren't always about food.
Oh,
Okay.
100%.
Okay, it's about, in particular in places like New York. I mean, I find it a bit irritating in New York. You say, where are you going this evening? You name the restaurant. They go, oh, that was so last year. And you go, well, is the food any good? Because I'm not really interested in whether it's last year or this year. But you have this kind of weird I guess it's a positive feedback effect where places just become hyper fashionable for a time and then basically hit a peak and fall off. I think London and the UK is less guilty of that. Generally, a good restaurant can remain a good restaurant for decades much more easily here.
I think social media is what pulls gasoline on the status and the beginnings of the status fire, because it's like, I think what Will Storr
actually, when I said, I think I said fashionable beliefs, he actually calls them luxury beliefs.
Luxury beliefs, fashionable beliefs, luxury beliefs.
Yeah.
But I think putting this again into kind of food and drink, the ultimate, as you said, you can't say you buy a Ford because you're a fucking moron. Yeah. But where I think this has almost gone to the next level is, those vegan meat brands.
Yes.
Who have their way of almost saying it is, we're going to look, we're not going to be like tofu or like tofu. What's the other one? Tempeh, which is like a kind of.
I know exactly.
Do you know what it is?
Yeah.
They're going to say we are in terms of this binary piece we were talking about earlier. It's like we are bacon. We are, and it's almost saying
you had of course the brand which I think is now owned by Unilever called the Vegetarian Butcher. Yeah. You had a brilliant branding effort in Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
Which was effectively saying this isn't a compromise. This isn't actually a substitute for meat. It's actually meatier than meat itself.
Yeah.
And that's a very clever branding. In a sense, Tesla very cleverly did it with electric cars because it had always been assumed that an electric car was a kind of compromise. That it was slower. It had lower range. That's kind of inevitable, at least at this stage. But, that you bought an electric car entirely as an act of self-sacrifice to benefit the planet. And Tesla comes along with a car which is basically a saloon car which has the performance of a supercar.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, literally, it squares the circle, if you like. It doesn't. It actually says this isn't a contradiction at all. There's actually no compromise required when you have an electric car. You can have an electric car which is a better car. But that question of turning politics into a status game where you seek to demean, for example, calling people racist for things which are not remotely evidence of racism on the part of the person using the language, for instance. Particularly some of that status game, I think, is evidenced by people taking up arms on behalf of minority groups rather than actually letting the minority group speak for themselves. I find something creepy about that.
Well, that's
I want to hear from trans people. I don't want to hear from a bunch of political activists affecting to speak on behalf of the trans community. I want trans voices on the TV talking about their own personal experience. Okay, and so when you have those people who essentially take up a kind of white savior approach, that's a status game. That's a luxury belief going on there. Now, it happens on the other side as well. I'm not suggesting this isn't in any way one-sided. What I'm saying is that there is no real form of persuasion that's effective that is preceded by the humiliation of the person you're trying to persuade.
Wait, say that again. So there's
I don't know of any effective form of persuasion other than the worst kind of Stalinist show trial, okay, where you effectively torture someone into confessing. But I don't know of an effective, enduring form of persuasion which starts off by humiliating the person you're seeking to persuade.
Yes.
Okay, so what you can learn from the advertising industry, I'm often find myself criticizing these things, not because I necessarily disagree with the intention behind them, but because I think they're just adopting very poor tactics if you wish to succeed. Now, okay, there are behaviors you can stigmatize. Okay, you can stigmatize drink driving, and that works. But actually, effectively stigmatizing what you might call the foundation myths or the core identity of the person themselves. Okay, that's not going to succeed. If something is deeply entwined with someone's identity, okay, then effectively you will impress your own peer group, your own in-group, if you successfully humiliate the opposition.
Turn that off, is that right?
Yeah,
sorry.
I'll do that in a second.
Yeah.
And what someone called this is the football-ification of politics. You know, if you look at football fans, they love yelling, really, potent abuse at the opposing fans. Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't, you never get anybody who's, what's the great Millwall phrase? No one likes us, we don't care. Okay. That behaviour makes you feel great if you're a Chelsea fan, abusing, the fans of poorer northern sides by waving money in the air. Okay. Yeah. I'm sure it's great fun. Okay. It may make you feel great and make you look good in terms of your standing within your own particular crowd. But there's not a single recorded instance of someone going, you're right, I'm going to abandon my support for Middlesbrough or Newcastle United and I'm going to become a Chelsea fan because of that activity. It doesn't work that way. Now, what we've got to remember is that because football loyalties are entirely kind of baked in, it isn't really an attempt to persuade, it's an attempt to humiliate. Okay? And it's entirely tribal. But it's not a healthy thing. It doesn't, it's not really a vehicle for voluntary social change through collective consensus.
Yeah, it's, are you right to just...
I'll go and do that now.
Yeah, so it bubbles up. It's, I think the point about the kind of the extremism point we were talking about earlier, about people jumping on the bandwagon